Hello, I'm Evely, and I will tell you one story. Let's go. The day had started as any other, yet beneath the veneer of routine something unspeakable stirred in the shadows of the old district clinic. I had come in for a routine checkup, my nerves already tingling from the sterile scent of antiseptic and the hum of outdated machinery. The waiting room, with its faded floral patterns and creaking chairs, whispered secrets of years long past. But it was not until I was ushered into the cramped examination room that I first sensed the subtle shift. A quiet, almost imperceptible noise that filled the air like the rustle of dry leaves in an abandoned forest. The room was small and dimly lit, its walls adorned with anatomical charts and relics of medical history that seemed to watch my every move. A lone, pale fluorescent bulb buzzed overhead, casting jittery shadows that danced along peeling wallpaper. I sank into a stiff, paper-covered chair and tried to dismiss the odd sensation that something was not right. Yet, even as I attempted to rationalize it, that small noise, a faint, irregular whisper, seemed to emanate from every dark corner, building slowly into a dissonant chorus. Moments later, the doctor entered. His features were deeply etched with the exhaustion of countless examinations, yet his eyes held an unsettling, distant look, as if he'd borne witness to horrors that no one should ever see. He offered a brief, almost forced smile before gesturing me onto the examination table. As I lay back, the creak of the metal bed sent a shiver racing through me. I could feel the hairs on my arms stand on end. There was an unaccountable heaviness in the atmosphere. It was during the examination that the room's oppressive silence was shattered. As the doctor leaned in to peer into my eye with a handheld ophthalmoscope, I heard it again, a sound like a cold draft slipping through a cracked window, punctuated by a faint, heart-wrenching scream. I froze, every nerve alight with terror, straining to pinpoint the source of that spectral sound. It was as if the very air around me had come alive with a mournful cry, echoing in the void between my ragged breaths. The doctor, unmoved, continued his clinical routine as if nothing were amiss. But then something extraordinary happened. In the reflection of my dilated pupil, illuminated by the ophthalmoscope's harsh light, I saw not only my own fear-stricken eyes but also a swirling darkness, a vortex of cold, unnatural air. Within that dark reflection, I could almost discern a shape, a presence that seemed to breathe out a sorrowful wail. The sound, soft and ephemeral at first, grew steadily into a desperate cry that reverberated in the hollow spaces of my mind. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, yet my voice was caught in a frozen, terror-stricken throat. A creeping dread enveloped me as the examination progressed. The doctor's once reassuring demeanor now felt like the calm before a cataclysm. Every instrument on his tray, once innocuous tools of healing, appeared to pulsate with a life of its own. The room's temperature plummeted suddenly, and a chilling draft swept through, carrying with it the stench of decay and long-forgotten grief. I sensed that the boundaries between reality and nightmare were beginning to blur. As the faint, mournful scream echoed again, its tone more anguished and insistent than before, the room transformed around me. The peeling wallpaper seemed to writhe like the skin of some ancient beast, and the anatomical charts morphed into grotesque, contorted visages of suffering. In the flickering half-light, shadows elongated into sinister shapes that moved with an almost deliberate intent. I could not shake the feeling that I was being drawn into a scene far beyond the mundane practice of medicine. A tableau of horror where every element conspired to trap me in its malevolent grasp. Then came the tapping. At first, it was a barely audible rhythm, like the slow, steady beat of a hidden heart. But soon it grew into a cacophonous thrum that vibrated through the very floor beneath me. Each tap seemed to mark the passage of time in that cursed room, counting down to an unknown calamity. My pulse thundered in my ears as I fought to understand what was happening. Was it a malfunction of the ancient building's plumbing, or something far more sinister? The doctor's eyes, now reflecting an eerie luminescence, held no answers, only a deep, sorrowful knowing. As I lay immobilized on the cold metal table, the doctor leaned in closer, his face half obscured in shadow. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely more than a whisper. "You have come seeking answers," he intoned, his tone a curious mix of pity and foreboding. "But some truths are better left undisturbed." Even as he spoke, the whisper of a draft, now undeniably accompanied by that otherworldly scream, filled the room, as though the very walls were lamenting ancient sorrows. In that dreadful moment, a cascade of impossible visions overwhelmed me. The instruments on the tray began to vibrate erratically, their surfaces reflecting brief, ghostly images of anguished faces that vanished almost as soon as they appeared. In the tarnished gleam of a metal tray, I saw a gaunt, spectral figure standing right behind me, a figure with eyes ablaze with a sorrowful fury and a silent scream etched upon its pallid face. I blinked, and the figure was gone, leaving behind only the crushing certainty that I was no longer alone. The air thickened. Every sound, every shifting shadow, bore the weight of an ancient, malevolent force. The faint scream that had first unsettled me now rose in a crescendo of despair, mingling with the droning hum of the fluorescent light. In that moment, I realized with a dawning horror that the boundaries of my world had been irrevocably shattered. I was caught in the nexus of something unspeakable, a malignant presence that defied logic and beckoned me toward an abyss of terror. And as the room trembled with the pulse of that relentless tapping and the spectral chorus of despair swelled around me, I understood this was only the beginning. A final, shuddering moment of silence descended, and I lay there, paralyzed as the true nightmare prepared to unveil itself. As the dreadful silence returned, I slowly came to my senses, the shock of that final moment lingering in every fiber of my being. The examination room, now a twisted mockery of its former self, seemed to breathe with a malevolent life. The fluorescent light overhead flickered erratically, each burst of light revealing grotesque shapes that defied explanation. The doctor was nowhere to be seen. In his place, I sensed a crushing presence, a malignant force that seemed to inhabit every corner of the space. Struggling to rise from the cold metal table, I discovered that my limbs were as leaden as stone, unresponsive to my desperate attempts at movement. The oppressive air pressed in on me from all sides, and the faint tapping, a relentless, insistent rhythm, resumed, each beat echoing like a death knell in the hollow chamber. It was as if the very walls were alive, their surfaces undulating and pulsating in time with my quickening heartbeat. Before my disoriented eyes, the room began to distort. The peeling wallpaper twisted into grotesque patterns resembling contorted faces and desperate hands clawing at the space around them. Shadows lengthened into misshapen forms that seemed to crawl along the ceiling and floor. At the far end of the room, where the examination chair had once sat, an impossible doorway appeared, an opening into a corridor that exuded a chill far beyond the grasp of any draft. Driven by a mixture of terror and an inexplicable compulsion, I managed to drag myself towards the eerie passage. With each laborious step, the oppressive force seemed to tighten its grip on reality. The corridor, lit by a sickly, amber glow from wall-mounted sconces, stretched out into darkness. Faded portraits of somber figures, their eyes filled with unspoken anguish, lined the walls. Each image felt like a silent witness to unspeakable secrets, their gazes following my every faltering step. A spectral presence accompanied me, a translucent woman whose sorrowful eyes and forlorn smile evoked both pity and dread. Her form wavered like a candle flame in a cold wind, and though she never spoke a word, her silent plea for help resonated within me. She led me deeper into the labyrinthine corridor until we reached a vast, vaulted chamber that defied logic. Here, reality itself seemed to splinter. At the center of the chamber stood an antique mirror, its frame intricately carved with figures that twisted into horrific contortions. The mirror's surface was a murky portal, reflecting not the chamber behind me, but a horrifying montage of scenes, fleeting images of anguished patients, deranged medical instruments, and a faceless doctor, his eyes hollow and desperate. As I stared, transfixed, a skeletal hand emerged from the mirror and caressed my cheek with an icy touch that froze my blood. A cacophony of noises filled the chamber, the rapid tapping now intermingled with a chaotic symphony of whispers and shrill cries, all of them weaving together into a maddening tapestry of sound. The spectral woman's expression transformed from sorrow to fierce determination, urging me silently to confront the horror before me. I realized then that this was no ordinary clinic. It was a nexus of despair, a cursed threshold where time and sanity had been devoured by the relentless hunger of the unknown. In a moment of gut-wrenching clarity, I recalled fragments of legends I had once dismissed as mere urban myth, stories of a doctor who had delved too deep into forbidden practices, opening a door to realms where the souls of the lost were forever trapped. The examination I had undergone was not a routine procedure but a meticulously orchestrated rite. Every creak, every whisper, every shudder of the building had been designed to lure an unwitting victim into this abyss. As the mirror's image dissolved into a shattering cascade of fragmented realities, the chamber began to tremble violently. The floor buckled beneath my feet as fissures of darkness splintered through the ancient stone. Each tremor carried with it the sorrowful cries of countless souls, their laments rising to a crescendo that threatened to break the fragile boundary between the physical and the spectral. The oppressive force that had guided me now revealed itself in full, a towering, amorphous mass of shadow and despair that defied human description. It roiled like a storm of ink and smoke, its form constantly shifting, while twin, searing orbs of light burned into my very soul. I stood paralyzed by fear as the entity's presence pressed down upon me with the weight of endless sorrow and malice. A voice, a gentle murmur that somehow carried both comfort and warning, whispered my name from the darkness. It was the voice of a long-lost memory, a promise of salvation from a time when life was unburdened by the horrors that now surrounded me. Yet as I strained to decipher its meaning, the shadow advanced, engulfing the chamber in a void where the only sound was the frantic, echoing tapping. In that desperate moment, I realized that escape was impossible without facing the heart of the nightmare. I gathered what little strength I possessed and moved towards the undulating mass, every step a battle against the primal urge to flee. The spectral woman reached out, her eyes locked onto mine, a final, silent plea for deliverance from this ancient curse. The floor gave way beneath us, plunging me into a swirling vortex of darkness and distorted memories. I felt as though I were tumbling through an endless void where the echoes of the past screamed in unison with the heartbeat of oblivion. Visions of the doctor's tormented gaze, the contorted faces in the mirror, and the anguished souls of those trapped here flickered before my eyes. Each vision was a shard of broken hope, a reminder that some horrors were not meant to be undone. Then, as suddenly as it began, the descent slowed. I found myself standing in a vast, subterranean hall, its walls lined with ancient runes and cryptic symbols that pulsed with a sickly luminescence. The incessant tapping had ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that reverberated with the promise of further dread. At the center of the hall lay an altar of cold, unyielding stone. Upon it, a single, blood-stained medical instrument, an archaic scalpel, gleamed under the dim light as though waiting to continue a ritual of pain and sacrifice. It was here, in that forsaken place, that I faced the truth, the scream, the draft, the spectral apparitions. All were part of an elaborate design to summon and bind an ancient malediction. The curse that had plagued the clinic, the doctor, and every tortured soul before me now coiled around my very existence. The instrument on the altar seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a dark heartbeat that threatened to claim me as its next victim. In one final surge of resolve, I reached out and grasped the scalpel. As my fingers closed around its cold metal, the hall trembled violently and a roar of anguish erupted from the depths of the cursed structure. The voices of the damned rose in a deafening chorus, each scream a dirge for lost hope and shattered dreams. The shadow, no longer a formless mass but now coalescing into the unmistakable shape of the tormented doctor, loomed over me. His eyes, filled with sorrow and remorse, implored me silently to end the cycle of pain. In that harrowing moment, the boundaries between savior and victim blurred. With the scalpel as both weapon and key, I understood that the only way to break free was to confront the curse at its very core, to sever the ties that bound these souls to eternal torment. Summoning every ounce of courage, I drove the blade into the cold stone of the altar. An otherworldly scream tore through the silence, a scream that was both mine and the anguished cry of every lost soul. As the chamber exploded in a blinding flash of light, the darkness recoiled and the oppressive force began to dissipate like mist under the morning sun. For a fleeting moment, I felt a fragile hope stir within me, a hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the curse could be undone. But even as the light faded, the echo of that eternal, unexplained scream reverberated in my mind, a chilling reminder that some horrors never truly die. The abyss had been confronted, and in its final throes, it offered me a choice, to escape and carry the memory of its terror forever, or to remain in the shadows guarding the secrets of a fate worse than death. With trembling resolve, I chose the uncertain path of escape, leaving behind the ruined hall and its unholy relics. Yet as I emerged into the dim light of the outside world, I knew that the specter of that monstrous examination and the everlasting scream that had heralded it would haunt me for all my days. The terror had become a part of me, a dark companion in a world that now seemed forever changed. And so I walked these streets, the echo of that unearthly scream forever entwined with my soul, a chilling reminder that the boundary between life and nightmare is perilously thin, and that sometimes the only escape is to face the darkness head-on. Thank you very much and see you all in the next video.